Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. It's Thursday. So we finished up with Unit 1 and Unit 2 review. Today and tomorrow we're going to hit Unit 3, which is the bio unit. And then I'm also going to include Unit 5 in there as well. So you'll see the types of drugs in this video. And then tomorrow I'm going to include the sleep stages and the sleep disorders in that. Okay, so we're cruising right along with our review. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions about specifics. If you need help with anything, if you're not understanding the FRQ or, whatever it is, if you need some help, we can Google chat, whatever you need. Also, make sure that you're getting those emails from the College Board because they are sending you guys emails and those are really important. There should have been an email on April 13th that you should have received. And there's going to be another one on April 27th that they're going to be sending, and that's going to give you great information on when they do the simulations on how to upload documents where you can practice. So if you're not getting those emails, make sure to double check in AP Classroom that your correct email is in there. And then make sure that in your email that you've kind of you're able to get their emails. It's not going to your junk mail or something. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through parts of Unit 3 today, and then you're going to have another short FRQ to do. I hope you're finding those helpful. The answers should be coming up for you. I think they are. If they're not, email me, but I think they are. Okay, so we're going to go right into Unit 3. Okay, and this is all about biology. Okay, so we started this unit talking about the neuron, and don't forget the neuron is just the basic building blocks of the nervous system. There's billions of neurons in your body, and the purpose of them is just to communicate with other neurons and help with sensory and motor functions. Okay, so the neuron, the basics of the neuron, remember we did the arm kind of with this to give you an example, the fingers. We'll start here with these little tree-like branches. Those are the dendrites. And they receive the messages from the other cells. Okay, so they're like the listeners. And then you have your cell body, which includes the nucleus. Okay, the cell body is kind of like the life center. It contains the nucleus. And the nucleus, remember, that decides if that, that cell body is going to fire or not. Okay, and then we move down to this long structure here, which is the axon, and that passes the messages from the cell body to the other neurons, muscles, or glands. Okay, and remember that little fatty tissue that's on top of the axon, that's the myelin sheath, and that covers the axon, and it helps speed up the transmission of the process. Okay, don't forget though, when it's not really good myelin sheath or it's there's damage to the myelin sheath, that's when multiple sclerosis happens. Okay, and then at the very end are the terminal buttons, and you'll see these little buttons here, and those connect to the other dendrites, and that's how the cells communicate. Okay, so communication runs that way, remember, dendrite, axon, terminal buttons, that way. Okay, I think I got all that. All right, so how do they communicate? So it's, when you think about this, you have to remember the resting potential. So the negative is typically negative when it's in that resting potential, right? And then there's this action. So then the chemicals kind of seep down and they get into the terminal buttons, and then there's this communication. So then this action potential where it goes up and it depolarizes. So that's when the potassium and the sodium come in. And then it goes back down to this refractory period or this resting period, right? Where it kind of regroups, it resets to be able to send another message again. Okay, so think about that. We did it, we talked about it one time with the toilet bowl flush, right? It's in resting potential, it's polarized, and then when you flush the toilet, then that's the action potential, it depolarizes, and then the refractory period, right? You can't flush it again because it's resetting and getting ready to do it again. So there's that refractory period in that. I show you this in a little diagram here. This kind of probably tells it a little bit better than I can, but there's this threshold, and then there's the stimulus, there's that, communication, then it depolarizes, right? It comes up here, and then it goes back down to this refractory period, this resting state. And it's really quick communication, remember that. Okay, and just another slide here with that, all action goes that way. Resting potential, depolarization, polarization. So this action potential, it's that neural impulse. It's that brief electrical charge that travels down an axon and is generated by the movement of the positively charged atoms in and out of the channels of that axon's membrane. Okay, so just a quick little picture there of that. Okay, so we're going to move into neurotransmitters, okay? And remember those neurotransmitters, our body has these natural neurotransmitters, and then drugs sometimes mimic or act like neurotransmitters as well. So we have these excitatory neurotransmitters. Those are neurochemicals that increase the likelihood that a neuron will fire an action potential. And then there's the inhibitory neurotransmitters, and those neurochemicals decrease the likelihood that a neuron will fire an action potential. Okay? And here's just a quick overview of the most important neurotransmitters that you're probably going to see on the test. And those are all in the Prezi in Unit 3 with my good mnemonics in there. So if you want to go back and look at that. But just a quick little synopsis of these. The acetylcholine, or ACH, remember that enables that muscle action, learning, memory. It's also associated with Alzheimer's disease. So muscle contraction, muscle spasms, learning, got it, okay. Dopamine, that's a big one. That influences movement, learning, attention, and emotion. So remember with dopamine, it's that reward center or pleasure center, and excess of dopamine is linked to schizophrenia, and then you know, the less dopamine you have, you might have Parkinson's with that. Okay, so keep in mind, don't forget that that's that feel-good neurotransmitter. Basically, it's that reward system, pleasure. Schizophrenia is too much, Parkinson's too few. Serotonin, this is all mood and emotion related neurotransmitter. Hunger and sleep sometimes are with that as well. Too few of serotonin, the undersupply, that's linked to depression. And sometimes Prozac and other antidepressant drugs, the purpose of those is to raise those serotonin levels because there's an undersupply of it. Okay. Norepinephrine. This is the only neurotransmitter that's also a hormone, so that's sometimes important to know. And we'll talk more about that in the endocrine system slide. But this helps control alertness and arousal. And an undersupply sometimes can be with depressed mood as well. So it's physical arousal, learning, memory. Sometimes it's with depression and stress too. When it's a hormone, norepinephrine, remember those adrenal glands are on top of your kidneys? That can be released in the hormones when there's that fight or flight response. Norepinephrine then can be released as a hormone. The next neurotransmitter that's important is GABA. Remember GABApello? It helps like calm us down. So it's one of those inhibitory. It's the most common inhibitory neurotransmitter, and that's sometimes linked to seizures, tremors, insomnia, and a lot of the time it's related to anxiety. Okay. So like an anti-anxiety medication, it's going to increase the GABA in your body, and that's going to help calm your body down. And then the last one on here is glutamate. And then remember, that one's the most excitatory neurotransmitter, and that's involved with memory. It's also involved with like seizures and migraines. Too much of it can be involved with seizures and migraines. And it sometimes it's why people sometimes avoid that MSG in certain types of food because there's a lot of glutamate in that. Okay, so moving on. So the influence of drugs on the neural firing. Okay, so this is just kind of like this is a real snapshot of like the dendrites in the terminal buttons, and there's this synapse here. So these little green dots, those are the neurotransmitters. And then, these receptor sites here, those are those little pockets where they fall into. So all those neurotransmitters have these like little synaptic clefts that they go into. So think of it as like the lock and key. So like, the lock to your house, you have this. So that's that neurotransmitter that fits so nicely into that little receptor site, right? So think of that for agonist drugs, that's like a little counterfeit key. It fits right in, it mimics the neurotransmitter, and then the antagonist blocks it, so they can't go in. So it would be like, a broken key stuck in a lock. Okay, so agonist drugs are going to mimic the effects of the neurotransmitter, and then antagonist drugs are going to block the effects of those neurotransmitters. Okay, I think that's what I wanted to say about that. Okay, and then the types of drugs, this is from Unit 5, but just a quick overview of the 3 types of drugs that you might see on the AP exam, and that's the stimulants. Those increase your brain activity, so it's going to be caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, ecstasy, amphetamines, and that's all just going to, really increase the brain activity. Depressants are going to decrease the brain activity, and that's going to be alcohol, barbiturates, opiates. And then there's hallucinogens, that category of drugs. Those create those visual distortions and perceptions. You might have auditory or visual hallucinations. Lots of things, happen in those hallucinogens. And that's like LSD, marijuana is in this category as well. Okay, so moving on, just quickly the overview of the nervous system. There's two parts of the nervous system. So the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord only, and then the peripheral nervous system is everything outside of that, okay? And with the peripheral nervous system, you have the autonomic nervous system, which communicates with the internal organs and glands. And then that houses the sympathetic division, which is the more arousing division, and then the parasympathetic, which is the more calming division of that. Okay. And then also in the peripheral nervous system, there's the somatic nervous system, and that communicates with sense organs and voluntary muscles. So remember, with somatic, it's I'm going to get some. It's all voluntary movement. Voluntary activity, and that's going to house the sensory and motor neurons in there. So autonomic is, it's internal organs, it's your breathing, it's your digestion, it's the hormones, all of that stuff that you're not thinking about doing that. Like you're not saying, oh, I have to breathe right now, and it's just automatically doing that. Okay. Okay, and then the endocrine system, just a quick overview of this. So think about when neural communication happens, that's just like me emailing or texting you. It's quick, and that's how the neurons communicate with each other. It's very quick. The endocrine system is more like snail mail, where you write a letter, you put your stamp on it, you take it to the post office. It's a little slower process, okay? And the endocrine system, get my notes out, that's the body's slow chemical communication system that works by releasing hormones into the bloodstream. Okay, so where neurotransmitters are electrical communication in the neurons, the endocrine system is in the hormones, and it's in the bloodstream. Okay. And you'll notice in the endocrine system, there's the pineal gland that helps with sleep, the pituitary gland, that's the master gland, that controls a lot of stuff in there. Adrenal glands, those are those glands on top of the kidneys, and that's your fight or flight response. And then you have your thyroid, the pancreas, all of those are in there. And the hypothalamus is also, even though it's in the brain, it's part of the endocrine system as well. And it kind of controls that pituitary gland. Okay? So make sure you just quickly, go through the endocrine system. If you have any questions, like read back on your reading guide with that. Okay, how do we study the brain? This is important to know, and it all kind of started, people started to do more studying of the brain after some case studies, like Phineas Gage. That was a famous accident, where Phineas Gage, he had that, that steel, here's a picture of it, I can't think of what it's called, that steel rail that went right through his head, and he sat up after the accident and talked to people. So it was just, after that, they really wanted to study these injuries to kind of look for behavioral and cognitive change to see, how that affects the brain and your functioning. Okay, so I'm going to run through the brain scans, and then we'll be done for today. And then tomorrow we're going to go more into the brain and the parts of the brain, and then a little bit of the sleep disorders. Okay, so there's two different types of studying of the brain. There's structure and function. So structural is when it's techniques that allow researchers to study the physical makeup of the brain, so the anatomy of the brain, and these would be the CT or CAT scans and MRIs. So that's all just the structure of the brain. And then there's the functional, and those are techniques that allow researchers to study an active working brain. So that would be the EEG, PET scans, and fMRI. Okay, so just a little bit more specific, the CAT scans or CT scans, that's where you take this 3D X-ray images. It's radiation, but it's of soft tissue from different angles, and it helps researchers locate tumors, damage from blood clots or strokes, but it does include radiation. The MRI is the imaging method used, uses computer enhancement, and it gets a really clear picture of the brain anatomy from exposure to these magnetic fields and radio waves. These have a little bit more greater detail than the CT scans, and they show more detail, and they don't use radiation. Okay, and again, these two show structures of brain images. All right. Okay, so the function ones, those are the brain scans that show function. That's the, let me try to get all this down. There we go. EEGs. So those are non-invasive imaging that is used to create amplified recordings of electrical activity across the brain surface. So remember those are like these little brain waves that shows. You get like a picture of it. It uses those electrodes. So remember when we watched that Shaq video where we were studying sleep apnea, he had to wear that hat that was just all these electrodes that were placed on the scalp. It's used a ton with sleep research, and it's also used to diagnose epilepsy. So that's an EEG. Those are those electrodes that are on there. And then there's the PET scans, and that maps the brain activity by people, they take the glucose, right? And then they're trying to, they introduce it into the blood, and then the areas of the brain light up when they're asked to do certain tasks because they have that glucose in there. And it helps with detection of strokes, Alzheimer's, and multiple sclerosis. Okay, and then there's the fMRI. So it's the same machine as the MRI, but what it does is it measures oxygen levels. So it gives you this real-time brain activity, right? And there's no radiation involved. It has a little bit better quality than a PET scan, and it tracks the blood flow to study the function of the active brain. So remember when we watched the love competition? I loved that. That showed that you can interact, like you can interact while the people are in the MRI machine, and you can say like, think about someone you love, and then you can see then the areas of the brain that light up with that. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. Tomorrow we're going to go all into the brain, and we're going to do a little bit of the sleep. We're going to finish up Unit 3 and 5. And there's a short FRQ for you also today. So again, please reach out if you have questions. Let me know if you're not getting emails from College Board or if you have any questions about that. Okay? All right. Take care, guys. Miss you.